and we keep throwing up our hands and saying, why do we keep getting the lesser of two evils to vote for? I'm done voting because my vote doesn't matter anyway. I would say you're right. Hi, I'm Alison Hartson.
And I'm Roza Calderon.
We are really groomed as a society to vote every 4 years in November during the general for president. And most people have no idea what a primary even is. They don't know what it means. They don't know why it's important. The primary election happens months before the general election. The general election is almost always in November. When it's not, it's simply because there's some kind of special election for a seat that opened up. So your general elections are in November, and we're used to that. The primary election typically happens in June. Sometimes we have exceptions that might happen in March. And that primary election determines if you're in a closed primary state, and we used to be closed primary here in California, which person from each party makes it into the general. Now that we are an open primary top two system, instead of having the top candidate from the Green Party, the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, the Libertarian Party, the Peace and Freedom Party, instead of doing that, now it's just the top two vote getters overall in the entire race. And it doesn't matter what party it is. And so we'll talk about maybe the pros and cons to that system. But what this means is that whether it's closed or open, whoever you end up voting for in November during the general election, you only have those choices because the people who voted in the primary gave them to you. Yep. They're the ones who said, this is these are the choices that you have. So when we continue to end up with two establishment Democrats or an establishment Democrat and an establishment Republican to vote for, and we keep throwing up our hands and saying, why do we keep getting the lesser of two evils to vote for? I'm done voting because my vote doesn't matter anyway. I would say you're right. Like if we keep voting like that, I mean, I used to think that way. I used to vote that way. Then that is what's going to happen. So we have to understand that the power of our vote actually comes during the primaries. And when we organize enough, and if you're not into organizing and activism, at least vote in the primaries to give us some better options, which we'll get into the details of these races. I would say that this has happened in some of the races, not enough of them, but we might be inching towards that. I don't know. We'll see when we break that down. But that's the case I really want to make for why the primaries are so critical.
So this is why I would like to say that primaries are far more important than the generals. And the reason why that is because this is, especially in California, we have a top two primary system, also known as the jungle primaries. But basically anybody from any party can be on the ballot at the same time. So it does give opportunity to third party, candidates who may never have received the vote from a Republican or a Democrat, but now they're all on the same ballot, so they have that opportunity. But this is the only time that you will see this many candidates on the ballot. This is the only time that you may see that many candidates that have your same values, your same platform, and you got to vote for them. And if you don't, I mean, you're going to go through the general, and the same two people that have always gotten through are going to get through. And I say that because statistics show that 91% of the time, the candidate with the most money wins. And that is how we are measuring the value of a candidate today. Is just, hey, how much money can you fundraise? I mean, if you measure things that way, if we went back to elementary school and said, whoever can sell the most See's candies and brings the most money in gets an A, I mean, what kind of world will we live in, and that's basically the measure that we have for people who are running our country. And that, I think, is a disgrace. And like you said, those are the people who chose to give you those top two options in November. So, I mean, the people who are really controlling the elections, the further back you go where there's an actual impact, the number gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. So be part of that small group, but make it larger. Let's get everybody that used to vote in November back into June. The other thing that you did mention is that now we will be having back and forth between March and June. That's just going to cause even more confusion for people. I'm not sure why we have opted to have off years, for presidentials, just so that we can have a say in who goes into the presidential debates or who goes into the general. But at the same time, we're also neglecting the midterms. And these are the people in the midterms who are really going to affect your life. If you look at the longevity of every single congressperson who is serving right now, they've been there for at least 10 years. I mean, so these are the people who are going to continue getting reelected by a minority of people who are voting during the primaries.
I would encourage everybody to make sure you make it a personal goal to vote in every single election. There are primary elections, there are general elections, and there are special elections. And so then the natural question is, how do I know when elections are coming up? So whatever state you're in, then you can go to the Secretary of State's website, and that's where you're going to find information about the elections in your area. It'll take a little bit of getting used to finding out, just like you go to any website, how do you find the information that you're looking for? But just Google Secretary of State California and go to that website. All of the data that I've provided already about the outcome of this election on June 5th, I got all of that from the Secretary of State's website. So anybody can do that. I did personally crunch some numbers here and there, and I definitely had to do some investigative work, but I also like that kind of stuff. So you can find out when the next election is, but the most immediate one is going to be on November 6th. That'll be the general election for this midterm. I'm helping people with the lingo. This is so November 6th, general election for this midterm, and mark it on your calendar. In regards to the top two system here in California, so they're already, this just passed. For those who don't know, this is new as of 2012. In 2010, it was passed. In 2012 was the first election where we had the top two system instead of a closed primary system. It's the open primary, right? So as I was explaining before, now it's the top two vote getters will actually advance to the general regardless of party, whereas before, whatever party that you were in, the top person of each party then advances. So you could have 5 people in the general, for example, but now you will only have 2 in every single race in the general. And so there's pros and cons to this that I wanted to talk about with you, Roza, that people have stated. And right now, the establishment is talking about getting rid, I'm seeing the writing on the wall. They're talking about getting rid of this open primary top 2 system. I'm already starting to see some of the articles in some of the establishment news sources like LA Times and some others where I feel like they're planting the seed to start having a big push to reverse it.
Scare tactics.
Yeah. And I think it's because it's actually more beneficial. There are cons. I could find pros and cons about anything ever. But I think that as of right now, maybe I'll change my mind after we see this play out for a few more election cycles, if the establishment will let us. But I think it's actually more beneficial for we, the people, to have a top 2 open primary system than not. Now, some of the cons or the negatives of this that I've thought about include that it can shut out a party. The top 2 system can shut out the party when you end up having only 2 people in the same party running against each other. So in the general, for example, there are some races where there's a Democrat going against a Democrat, so it left out the Republicans. Now there's also races where there's a Republican facing another Republican in the general, totally leaving out the Democrats. And some of the negatives that can come around that, it doesn't excite people from one party or the other to come out and vote. It just doesn't give maybe the minority party or the alternative party an option. But I think that there isn't enough of that actually happening to warrant that to be a reason to not have it. But you will not see, I'm not seeing it in the articles I'm reading, I'm not seeing anybody break down that it's not actually an issue. And let me tell you why I don't think it's an actual issue. So in statewide, in this race, there were, out of the statewide races, like U.S. Senate, governor, lieutenant governor, controller, etc., 2 of the 8 races are between a Democrat and a Democrat. All of the others are between a Democrat and a Republican. That's with this top two system. Enough voters came out to actually put a minority Republican going up against a majority Democrat, because obviously we're a majority Democrat state. So it's still working, really, is what I see. And then there are 53 congressional districts for U.S. House here, and 91% of those, and all 53 are up for re-election every 2 years. 91%, which is 48 out of the 53, are between a Democrat and a Republican or another party, such as I think one of them, like, what's that?
There was a green, right?
There might have been a green, or that might have been at the state level. But yeah, most of them, maybe no party preference. I think there was one that was no party preference. But 91% with our top 2 systems still between a Democrat and a Republican. So right. I just want to make sure people are aware that, like, as you are hearing people make this argument against the top 2 system, it's still working where you have different parties making it into the general.
Yeah, and actually, I'd like to add on to that, because I argued against this over and over again, because in my race we have, this is actually the most conservative district in all of California, and I dared to run here. And so we had, I think, 4 Democrats, 2 Republicans, no independents, nobody else. So 6 people on the ballot. And the tactics that were being used to scare people to get in line on the Democratic side was, hey, if you don't get behind one candidate, we are going to split the vote and 2 Republicans are going to get through. Statistically, that was a lie. The facts point to that was a lie, because over the last few elections, we have seen that anytime that there's really a challenger to a Republican incumbent, they can only pull between 5 to 8% of the vote from that incumbent, which is what we saw. The Republican who was challenging McClintock was only able to pull like 7%. So right in between what I had predicted. Statistically, it shows that a Democrat and a Republican will get through no matter what. The only way that could have been impossible is if we had split the ticket enough and in an evenly way. So let's say there was 7 candidates and we split the vote evenly to where each one of us only got 6%. Then yeah, there's a good chance the Republican's going to get through. But there weren't 7 candidates. There was 4. So the chances of one Democrat getting through were really high. They were just enormously high. So anybody who got over 8% was going to be able to get through. But that was not the rhetoric that we were hearing. And that was just to get people to fall in line with whoever the Democratic Party had endorsed. And in places where the Republicans were trying to get on that ballot, they followed the same model. It's a top 2. It's a top 2. You have to get in line. You have to vote for the party. Again, a person from our party is better than a person from their party.
So people are still voting right now as though we have a closed primary system. Mm-hmm. Where, I constantly heard people say, why are you even bothering? Dianne Feinstein's definitely going to win. Well, yeah, no shit, Sherlock. 100% of the incumbents won in California, and 90-something% on average win throughout the country. No, I would joke around all the time, telling people that I'm working real hard to make second place. Like, who says that, right?
Yeah.
That's what you're really doing in a top 2 system like this, is you're fighting for second place. So then the question becomes, how do you vote in a strategic way to get who you want into second place? And as far as strategic, what I mean by that is, going back to what we were saying, actually voting our conscience. Because if we vote our conscience, which is 100% anti-establishment, done with the status quo, We care more about policies that are going to represent people. We are not concerned about party anymore. We are not concerned about the politics of politics and the personalities and so forth. We need policies to protect and represent our communities. And if we continue to vote that way, we will get the right people into the top two. And that brings me to why the top two system is so much better, because it is the only chance that we have of taking out an incumbent.
Absolutely. I completely agree there.
Yeah. So let me just break this down for people who haven't really thought much about this or aren't fully aware of how this works. So because you are able to actually have a chance at, so I ran as a Democrat, Dianne Feinstein's a Democrat. I actually have a chance of making it into the top two in the general and facing her off, because the party doesn't matter in an open primary top two system like this. But if it was closed primary, like it was going back to 2010 and prior, then only the top Democrat in the primary makes it. Well, because we are such a heavily Democratic state and the incumbent wins 100% of the time, then you always have the Democratic incumbent making it into the general every time. There is no chance ever of a progressive inside of the Democratic Party ever making it into the general. This is the only way that it allows people to pull their party. We were all like wrestling for to out progress each other.
Yeah.
Progress of each other. And I think that is healthy, and it would not be possible if we didn't have this top two system.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really important. So even now, having De Leon challenging Feinstein, that would have never been possible without this top two primary system. The race that I mentioned earlier between Maria Estrada and Rendon, those are two Democrats. We wouldn't be able to do that if we had a close primary election. And so to make the changes that even our own party's fighting us on, we need this top two primary system.
Yes, which is exactly why I think the establishment's going to work hard to get rid of it. Because the Democratic Party keeps touting unity, unity, unity. And what they really mean is submission, submission, submission,
Right.
just blind obedience and loyalty. And so because it allows, for exactly what we're talking about, for actual progressives to really challenge the incumbent establishment candidates, then yeah, that's not good for them. And of course they're going to fight back on that. So we have to be prepared about that and keep this conversation going to fight to keep the top two system, even though of course it's going to have its flaws, but every single system is going to have flaws. This is going to have more flaws if we continue to vote like it's a closed primary. We have to get the word out about how people have so much better of an opportunity now to vote their conscience because we have open primaries. People are really, really limited in places like New York, where Kyle Kulinski of Secular Talk is a hardcore progressive. He has such a strong voice and opinion on such important matters, and he is forced to vote as strategically as possible for whatever that means in a closed primary where he's forced to be a Democrat so that he can be able to vote for Nixon over Cuomo. That's the only way that he can actually vote for her because of their closed primary system. But if they had an open primary top two system, he would be able to, if he wanted to, become an independent or join a third party and still vote for Cynthia Nixon without having to change his party. I think that is so much more democratic. I was really encouraged by the fact that so many Republicans were following me on Facebook and Twitter and had the integrity, honestly, to say, you know what, Alison, I don't agree on everything that you believe, but I know that you have the best interest for us in mind. And I do agree on some things, especially corruption. And so I'm going to vote for you. And so they would say when they disagreed with me about something, and they would say when they agreed with me about something. And to be able to have that civil discourse, being different parties, that is what this open primary top two system is allowing. That's so much more democratic and productive. It's exciting to me. another reason I think that the top two system is so much better is because it's going to eventually, as we get more used to this and keep having these conversations, train voters to put policy first. Because then you're like, if party doesn't matter and I can vote for anybody, okay, well, tell me what your policies are. Tell me what it is that you stand for and why I can trust you. And I had so many more of those conversations during this race than I've ever had before in other races where I wasn't running, but, working, with candidates and so forth because of this system. So I think that it has a chance of like really kind of doing a lot of what we were talking about earlier, like grooming people to become more politically aware and putting policy first as voters alone. And also, I think that third parties are going to have a better chance this way. So one of the things that does concern me is this top two system kind of keeps the third parties out in a way, because you would see like the top green get into a general in a closed primary. You'd see the top libertarian or peace and freedom party. But now if they didn't make it in the top two, which they don't typically, then they're left out of the general, and it's that less, that much less time that they have to speak about their platform, which is informative and important. But now, so there's a couple races, and I think they're state level, like state senate or state assembly, where a green made it into the top two, and it's a Democrat versus a green. And I think that because it comes down to those two, it might give the green third party an actual better shot at winning in November, especially when the voters now only have those two juxtaposed next to each other and can now really compare the Democrat versus the third party progressive Green Party. So it's going to be interesting to watch and see if that plays out that way.
Yeah, I'm excited to see that too.
My final reason and probably my top reason for wanting to keep this top two open primary system is because Nancy Pelosi hates it. That's enough. That's enough. That's all I need.
Join us next time as Roza and I continue our conversation, discussing policies and other actions we can take to get out the progressive vote.